Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us and being able to stick it out even with that terrible weather. Really appreciate you coming and giving us basically a full house tonight. So my name is Jared Mondschein. I'm the Director of Research at the U.S. Study Center at the University. The event tonight is called What the Iran War Means for the Middle East and the World. And you may be wondering, U.S. Study Center, why would you be talking about Iran? I think it's pretty clear in my mind why we are, but maybe I'll just quickly explain it before we kick off tonight. Nearly a month ago, the U.S. and Israel launched a surprise attack on Iran, killing the supreme leader. And it triggered a wider conflict that now involves most of the Middle East, and missile strikes that have killed hundreds of civilians across the region. And the human cost altogether, though, is in the thousands. And it's still mounting, and there's really no end in sight. But beyond this violence, I think the Strait of Hormuz and the closing of it has led the International Energy Agency to call this the greatest global energy and food security challenge in history. For some who have watched the Islamic Republic of Iran persecute and brutalize its own people for decades, this moment carries a lot of hope and a lot of promise. For others, the sight of foreign missiles, especially American missiles in the Middle East, is a moment that carries dread and a moment that carries concern. But regardless of how you feel, this is a moment that is impactful, I think, to the whole world. And you only need to look at, as I mentioned before, energy prices to see how much it is affecting the whole world. We've already seen India is closing some factories. The Philippines has already called a national emergency. Vietnam is showing some closures as well. This is impacting all of us, and it's not impacting all of us equally, especially those in Iran. And what we want to do tonight is answer a few key questions. One, what does this mean for the people of Iran, what we're seeing? Two, what are the key U.S. objectives? What's the U.S. doing here, and why is it doing it? And lastly, what are the implications for Australia and the Pacific? So to have this discussion, I got a fantastic panel with us tonight who can answer all these questions. So immediately to my right, I have Faraz Maghami, who is a lawyer, and I want to make sure I get his esteemed biography correct. He's a member of the National Assembly of Iranian Jurists, a nonprofit public policy organization based in Washington, D.C., and he was called to the bar in 2009, and he practices from the Sydney Bar while maintaining an international advisory practice across the Pacific, the UK, Europe, and the United States. We also have my boss, Mike Green. He's a professor and chief executive officer of the U.S. Study Center. Before he was here, he was at Georgetown and CSIS, a leading think tank in the United States. At both of those organizations, he was the head of their respective Asia programs, and before that, he was in the White House on the National Security Council as the senior director for Asia. And then we also have Rana Dadpour, who is a research fellow in the social and economic risk at the Cairns Institute. I just want to take some pride right there that I pronounce it the Australian way, not the American way. Thank you. She's also a founding member of Aus-Iran or Australian United Solidarity for Iran, which represents the Iranian diaspora in Australia and advocates for change in Iran. So, to kick things off, I thought what we do to kick things off right away is ask one question that I think everyone may have a different perspective on. And in military jargon, you say it's like a sit-rep situation, discussion. Why is this happening? What's the sort of status of things going on right now? So maybe we could I'll start with Mike for this one, because he knows the strategy, he knows the military components, he knows the U.S. perspectives, but then same questions to my other panelists. So Mike, could you just give us a lay of the land of what we've seen so far?
Thank you. I wish I knew the strategy, but we'll come back to that. And I'm grateful that Rana and Faraz could join us, because when we talk about the sit-rep, the one that should concern us the most is what's happening to the people of Iran, and we'll get to that. But let me just bring us a bit up to date, get us on the same page. Many of you follow this and will know this, but just to put us on the same page before we go into details. So since Operation Epic Fury began on February 28th, the U.S. And Israel have decimated Iran's leadership, the command and control infrastructure, the infrastructure for repression. You hear different numbers. The U.S. Central Command Admiral said about 2/3 of Iran's missiles, drone production facilities, naval assets have been destroyed thus far, and those bombings go on as we speak. Israel has recently ramped up its own attacks on Iran's nuclear-related infrastructure, I think perhaps because they sense there may be an agreement or a ceasefire coming. They want to do as much as possible to set back Iran's nuclear ambitions. And of course, Israel's hitting Hezbollah on the ground in Iran. In Lebanon. But Iran has, as we know, essentially closed the Strait of Hormuz. It's hit dozens of refineries, oil fields, gas plants, ports, and other energy infrastructures across the Middle East, creating, as Jared said, the biggest energy crisis we've seen. And we're in the ironic situation where, because of that energy crisis, the United States has lifted sanctions on Iran and Russia to try to stabilize prices. We know that Israel and the U.S. have what in the military jargon is called complete air dominance. They can fly and go where they want with impunity, bomb what they want if they find it. The U.S. has moved 2 Marine Expeditionary Units and parts of the 82nd Airborne to the region. That's not enough troops to invade Iran, but it's probably enough to grab Kharg Island or coastal positions that Iran uses to attack shipping in the Straits. We know that Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and others, while probably unhappy about the attack initially, have decided they have no choice but to support the U.S., so that increasingly missions are being flown out of those Gulf airfields. And we know that Pakistan, Turkey, and Egypt have been trying to broker peace talks between the U.S. and Iran, but it's hard to know what the situation is. We know the U.S. has tabled a 15-point peace plan. Iran has said that it's too extreme. It includes complete elimination of nuclear capabilities and other things. Iran has said alternately there are no negotiations, or plans have been passed to us and we won't do negotiations. President Trump has said we're almost done. He said that Iran sent him a special gift, an award. One late night comedian in the U.S. quipped, "It's the world's best enemy award." We don't know what it was. So we really can't, from the pronouncements coming out of Tehran or even Washington, know exactly where the diplomacy is, but we know that it's actively happening, and that the Gulf states and Pakistan, Egypt, and Turkey in particular have a real interest in this calming down. So what happens next? We'll talk about that a bit, but I don't think anyone really knows for sure.
Great, thank you. You want to go and then have...
Sure. I think Michael has covered the field in this regard. The only thing I would add is this, that, and I suspect we'll cover this as the night goes on, but the GCC, the Gulf states, are now a lot more gung-ho than they were in the first couple of days of the war. Gung-ho, pro-war. And it's a topic I'd like you to keep in mind once we get closer to that question.
Great, thank you. Then, yeah, on the ground, anything you want to add in terms of how the Iranian people are...
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, sure. So on the ground, first I mentioned that whatever I say is based on the big network I have inside Iran, and they managed to send some messages, and the network we have here, the diaspora, Iranian Australian communities. So what we have heard for Iranian people inside Iran, it did not start with the attacks of Israel and United States. It started a few months ago by the mass uprising that happened inside Iran, and in less than 2 days, tens of thousands of people had been mowed down and killed by the regime inside Iran, and tens of thousands again in prison and in line for execution. So the attacks, I think, came right after this moment. We need to always keep this context in our mind, that the Iranian people have been fighting against this regime for a very long time. And that's why maybe some of the reactions that you hear or you've seen might be feeling a bit confusing for you, for us who live in a democracy here. So I just wanted everyone to have that context and background in their minds as well. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, I think last estimates I saw were some 30,000 killed in the
Yes,
just in January?
yes, yeah, at least 30.
At least
1,000.
30. So Mike, going back to what you were saying, I'd love to hear what the US objectives are in Iran, or what US objectives or lack thereof. What would you say they are?
Let me preface that first by saying they're confused, obviously, and the president has, by one analyst's account, given 12 different objectives for the conflict, and so it is quite easy to say that's a problem, and it is. But I do think it's important to first put on the table the fact that Iran is a significant threat to Israel, of course, to the United States, to Australia. The Iranian ambassador was sent out of the country because Iran was behind anti-Semitic attacks in Australia. The IRGC attempted twice, we are told, by public intelligence reports, tried twice to assassinate President Trump. Obviously, they've been supporters of Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and others attempting to sow destruction across the Gulf. I used to have lunch with Dennis Richardson, who was ambassador in Washington, and Dennis liked to invite people like me to lunch at Cafe Milano, and we'd eat at the table where the Saudi ambassador was targeted for assassination with a bomb by Iran until the FBI found out. If you know Dennis Richardson, he's got that kind of sense of humor. So I just want to put that on the table first. We were not in some sort of peaceful, happy situation. And I didn't even mention what you just heard about the absolutely brutal, really in the modern era, unprecedented murder of their own citizens. So there is cause for conflict. There is a threat. The nuclear, Iran has over 400 kilograms of enriched uranium at about 60%. You need 90% to build bombs. One of the questions is, how close were they? The president has said weeks. A lot of experts say they don't think so. It's more like months or years. So part of the question is, how urgent is that? And international lawyers will say there's a case for urgent preemption of a threat like that, but the urgency depends on information I don't have, and that the president isn't sharing with the public or with allies. I think Israel and the U.S. military has a fairly consistent explanation of the objectives, which is degrading Iran's ability to do harm. Their missiles, their navy, their drone factories, and to degrade their ability to sustain the infrastructure of repression against the Iranian people and weaken the regime. I think for Israel, in that sense, they are achieving their objective. And for Israel, this is what is called mowing the lawn. I don't think Israel looks at these situations like we would in the West, where you have a war, a victory, and a victory parade. They just need to mow the lawn. They need to reduce, and they have, Iran's ability to harm them. That is how the Central Command, the Pentagon, has described U.S. objectives, even though the president and others have had different political objectives. Israel succeeded. I think the problem for President Trump is, some of you may have studied Clausewitz, but Clausewitz said in war, you have to find out what is the enemy's center of gravity. And our center of gravity in the United States and the West is, we're comfortable. We're comfortable, and we were not prepared for this economic impact or this cost and energy prices. The Israelis can handle it. 10 missiles a day is manageable for the Israelis. That's just another day in the office. And so, Netanyahu and the Israeli government understood their center of gravity, understood that this attack was something that was worth it, because they could achieve their objectives and sustain the escalation. It appears President Trump assumed that the United States could too, that it would be like the attacks last June or Venezuela. But in fact, the American center of gravity is quite vulnerable. He really led with a glass jaw. Every war college student in the United States, every graduate student who's looked at this said, of course, Iran can close the Strait of Hormuz. They haven't in past because it hurts them too. And this has hurt them. The Gulf states or the GCC countries are now aligned against them with Israel and the US. That is a strategic defeat for Iran. But because of the regime change element and decapitation, they became desperate. and they've now escalated and they're closing the strait. That might have been worth it, and the U.S. could have sustained public and allied support to deal with that. The problem is the president did not explain to the public, to the Congress, to allies what we're about. And as a result, support for the war in the United States has been about 40% from the beginning. You know, Vietnam, Iraq were controversial, but at the beginning they had about 80% support in the public. But that's the challenge. There may be an argument for a sustained campaign, but if you wanted to do it, you had to build the congressional, American public and allied support because there would be costs. And that's where we are now. We're sort of stuck.
Can I ask one quick follow-up? Because we're going to have questions, but I imagine you're going to get this question. Is the U.S. simply doing Israel's bidding on this one?
I don't think so. There is a debate in part of the MAGA movement. This whole thing is split. President Trump's, not the general voters, but the sort of commentariat has split. And there's an anti-Semitic group that says, see, Israel controls everything. I don't believe that. I think the threat was sufficient to justify consideration of the use of force. What I think they failed to do is consider what was at stake, what was at risk. How do you shore up American public, congressional, and allied support? Because when you lose that, that's your center of gravity. And that's what Iran is clearly targeting, as did North Vietnam and other U.S. foes in history.
Faraz, maybe I'll go to you. How do you think the regime, the Iranian regime, the Islamic Republic, is actually interpreting this conflict? Is this an existential threat, or is this just a manageable crisis for them?
I don't know what the mullahs of Tehran think. No one does. I don't think the mullahs of Tehran know what they think. But I think there is one point that's critical to understand here. There is a distinction, and I want to make that clear as someone who's of Persian heritage. There's a distinction between Iranians or Persians and the mullahs of Tehran, because the people of Iran see this war as a very different proposition. Most of the people in Iran see this war as a different proposition than the mullahs of Tehran. Why? For the reason that Rana just said earlier, because there was a massacre in early January. A massacre, the figure that officially we talk about in parliaments and Congress and elsewhere where we appear as advocates on behalf of the people of Iran, a figure of 45,000 at a conservative rate. So the NAIJ, of which I'm a member of, has been giving evidence in parliaments around the world. I gave my evidence in parliament here in Australia. 45,000 figure is not a figure plucked out of thin air. This is a figure combed through by doctors living in the West who are in contact with doctors and morgue operators within Iran. Now, why do I start my answer on that basis? The mullahs clearly see this war as an attempt by the West, the Americans and the Israelis, to assist the uprising within Iran. Why? Because we've had uprising after uprising in Iran since 1999. Then the Green movements. Then 4 years after that. Then 2 years after that. Then 3.5 years ago with the Masa uprising, the Women Life Freedom uprising. And then again on the 28th of December last year, when people were going out and complaining about the cost of living. And 9 days later, as we said, they were being mowed down by military-grade weaponry on street corners. So I think the Iranian regime, the mullahs of Tehran, see this as an existential threat, not as a war that they can manage, even if they are causing havoc in the Middle East. And they are seeing the threat as something that is designed to assist the uprising, an organic uprising within Iran. Whether or not that's going to achieve it, I don't know. I doubt it. Is it going to assist the people in Iran to have the comfort to stand up and go out and protest, not whilst bombs are being dropped, I don't think. Post-bombing, I don't know. So definitely I think they see it as an existential threat, as something that could end their rule of 47 odd years.
Yeah, sure. I agree with Faraz. They are looking at it as an existential threat, and it seems like they are trying to manage it through different ways, through the lies and the deception of the international community. And I hope they won't be successful in doing so. But an evidence for that, how it is existential to the regime, is the intense brutality that it is showing right now inside Iran. Executions are happening while bombs are falling. And these executions are execution of people who had been arrested only 2 months ago. So it shows clearly that there hasn't been any proper procedure for that. People are being searched in their houses, in the hospitals, and everywhere, for any signs of being against the regime, being against or taking photos of the destructions that happened because of the bombs. We have seen there are checkpoints now in the streets in all cities, even in places that there are no bombings. And through these checkpoints, they stop cars, they stop people, and then they even shoot them.
And these are new checkpoints, and they usually don't have checkpoints.
We didn't have it for a long time. We had it through when the Iran and Iraq war was happening. So I remember as a child that I was in the car, and all the time the cars had been stopped. My dad was driving, and they come and search the whole car. So 2 kids are sleeping. My sister and I sleeping in the car. They woke us up, took us out of the car and searched everywhere under the seats, looking for everything, anything, basically. Right now, they even check phones, people's mobile phone, and check their messages, even Instagram posts and things like that. And as an evidence for what Faraz said, how people are different from this regime, I refer everyone to the celebration that we saw inside Iran when Khamenei was killed. My mom was on the street. She called me from the street, and I could hear celebration. I could hear cars honking, and my mom said, "Oh, they said Khamenei is dead. Everyone's celebrating." And then she just told me that a neighbor just came and offered some sweets to her. Of course, the regime people came, after half an hour and started to, threatening everyone. So they had to go back. But that shows the difference and the huge gap that exists between people, civilians that are in Iran, live in Iran, and the regime.
Can I hear a bit more on that? Because so we heard about how the regime is handling this, but anything more on the people? Like, for example, I've heard some Iran experts say the regime maybe has 10 to 15% support. Is that what you think is an accurate number?
Yes. So Gaman is an organization that does very trustworthy surveys among Iranians with a very sophisticated methodology. And their findings is that, yes, it is around 10% up to maximum 15%. And this statistics is from before the massacre. So I think it's even now less. And specifically with the war that is happening and the supporters of the regime being targeted, I think it's now even less.
Mike, going back to the strategy, we've heard a lot about the Asia pivot, which was the U.S. engaging in Asia and sort of pivoting away from the Middle East or deprioritizing, lots of different ways to talk about this. But this is something that came out during the Obama administration under Hillary Clinton. And in many ways, it continued under the Trump administration, the Biden administration, in terms of prioritizing the Indo-Pacific over the Middle East. We've already seen the U.S. remove a THAAD missile battery from Korea to the region, and I think there are only 8 in the world. Is this the death of the Asia pivot, as some have already said in the media?
I don't think so, but of course the war's still, unfolding. So we will see. I'm going to answer that, but let me just pick up on what Rana and Faraz just said. I mentioned that the center of gravity that Iran is targeting on the U.S. side is congressional popular support and allied support. Iran has its own weak center of gravity, which is that it has no support from the people of Iran. That's their main enemy. And the only way they sustain their leadership, their government, is brutal repression. And I spent a lot of time working on North Korea and went to Pyongyang and saw it firsthand. That's a much more tightly controlled Stalinist system, where my son did his pre-HSC for history extension at Scott's today, and we were studying last night, and it's on Stalin. And so we were talking about Stalinism and Stalin's repression. And Stalin and North Korea's system is Stalinist, but under Stalin, 1 in every 7 households had an informant. In North Korea, it is every household from birth has an informant. My understanding in Iran is it's not, the control is not that tight, and the public sentiment is much more against the regime. And so the Israeli objective of mowing the lawn, or the U.S. objective, regime change is impossible to predict if you're only using air power. And so it was what in American football is called a Hail Mary pass, maybe. But the Israeli view, and I think the U.S. view, is this does weaken the regime to the point where regime change from within becomes more possible. I think it sounds like President Trump was hopeful it would happen right away. And the regime is so brutal that is not guaranteed at all, and I would say is unlikely. But in the medium to long run, this does weaken the regime's control, I think, physically and in terms of whatever legitimacy they had. Now, on the pivot, look, I was in charge of Asia during the Iraq War, and those of us who worked on Asia were constantly struggling to get resources, development assistance, diplomats, aircraft carriers. The Marines, the first wave of Marines that came from Okinawa, came from Japan, the THAAD battery from Korea, and of course, the U.S. is expending certain munitions, especially anti-missile missiles, Patriots and so forth, at a very high rate. And it's impossible to hide that doesn't sort of weaken U.S. military power in this region. And some people are saying we just shouldn't be there because we have to be in the Indo-Pacific. My own view is the U.S. is a world power, and theaters are not disconnected from each other. And credibility, for good or bad, can be affected from one theater to another. And in Iran, this is the dilemma. And Iran, left to its own devices in the Gulf, clearly has irredentist intentions against the Gulf states, clearly wants the elimination, destruction of Israel. And that is a conflagration that would keep the U.S. out of the Indo-Pacific for years. So there has to be some level of military, diplomatic treatment of problems like Iran or Ukraine. My sense is, for now, it's not too much. Now, maybe we'll talk about scenarios later. If the U.S. gets bogged down in a much longer fight, if we have to maintain major forces to keep the Strait of Hormuz open, if we go to a containment strategy that requires much greater air and naval assets in the Gulf states to contain Iran, that's all going to come out of the Indo-Pacific pot. So that's why you see the Japanese Prime Minister in Washington a week ago pushing hard for allies to help the U.S. prevail and get out of this as fast as possible. So it has an impact, but I don't agree with those who say we just shouldn't be dealing with other parts of the world because they're connected, as we can see from the energy prices.
So talking about regime change, I'd love to know, for those of you running dissent on the panel, we're seeing, as Mike said, a weakening of the regime. And I would imagine that you both agree with that. But the question I have, though, is, does that improve conditions for Iranians on the ground, or is it making things worse? So in other words, does external pressure strengthen the regime domestically, or is it exposing weaknesses?
Sure. That's the million-dollar question, right? That's the question that the White House has been asking itself. That's the question that Bibi and co have been asking of the head of Mossad. That's the question that the Europeans are asking themselves as they are gearing up to get involved. And I heard this morning that the French is cobbling together a team to send over, and as we say somewhat in jest, that the French do things 8 out of 10. They're not perfect, but they're French, so we don't expect any more. But the Germans, 10 out of 10, right? Merz of Germany said today, we will take steps, if we have to secure the Strait of Hormuz. And this is now becoming a serious issue for the world. That is the energy crisis. But why is that relevant to the question that you asked? As the rest of the world gets involved in this fight, and it's not simply a fight between America, Israel, and Iran. So America and Israel on the one hand, and Iran on the other. It is really, in effect, what Mike was saying. It's pitched as a battle between good and bad. Right? Whether we agree or disagree, that's how it's been pitched. That's how it sells. I'm a barrister by profession, and as a barrister, as an advocate, I sell ideas to judges and to juries, and I see what is happening in this case. They are trying to sell that idea to advocate for a particular position for the public. Now, for that, you need ingredients. You need evidence. The evidence that the United States and Israel on the one hand, open bracket, perhaps with some of the Europeans, close bracket, that they need in order to sell this idea, to sell this war to the people and who are paying $3 petrol, is to show at some point that the Iranian people will take matters into their own hands and an uprising, organically or assisted, will happen. That doesn't answer your question directly as to whether or not this war will in fact result in that. My 2 cents, I think it will no doubt assist the process. I agree with Mike, it's not going to be immediate. Who's going to go out when bombs are being dropped, at a rate of 6,000 sorties or whatever it is per week? No one's going to do that. But does it then ultimately, in the next number of weeks or number of months, translate to galvanizing the Iranian population to go out and say, you know what, you've killed 45,000 of us in 2 days on the 8th and 9th of January. For the last 47 and a half years, you've been killing people because they're a different religion. You've been killing people and abusing them because they have different political aspirations, because they have different sexual orientations, because they are of a different ethnicity to you. Enough is enough. And by the way, thank you, America. Thank you, Israel, and whoever else that helped by dropping bombs on the heads of the besieged. The people who come out, the volunteer force who come out on behalf of the IRGC, which I'll get to later, the Revolutionary Guard Corps, the real terrorists within the regime, also branded as, the second army within an army. The people, no doubt, will be galvanized by the weakening of those forces within Iran. When they come out, I don't know. Will they come out? My view, absolutely.
I do agree with all that was said. And to me, the regime is weakening, and I'm looking at its behavior and reactions. So the intensified brutality against people on the streets right now that is happening is one indicator to me. And also the reaction that it shows to Gulf countries. Right now, Iran throwing missiles at, I think, 13 countries at the same time. So this shows that this wounded monster is just trying to survive and throwing its arms and legs everywhere, trying to show that the strength that doesn't exist there, it's just only brutality and violence that it shows. So yeah, to me, it has been weakened, and we have seen it is losing support. For example, Lebanon recently announced the ambassador of Iran as a person non grata. So that's a huge news, because the regime has been supporting and funding Hezbollah for years and years, and we know how they are integrated into the Lebanese government. So yeah, so these indicators to me shows that it is happening. And every time that I talk to people inside Iran, if we manage to do that through specific communication, because there's a blackout communication blackout right now, that's what we hear as well. People say that what they see on the street is frightened besiegers. They are scared. For example, even at those checkpoints, every now and then they try to stop cars, even stop kids in those checkpoints, just to save themselves, because they know that those checkpoints have been targeted by missiles. So now they try to engage civilians in those areas and keep them as long as possible, just to save their own lives. I've seen several photos of checkpoints that had been evacuated. There's no one there anymore. So these shows to at least me that it is weakening. But what will happen if it continue to exist as a weakened monster? That's what we need to see.
I'm running out of time, so I have a lot more questions than I do have time. So I guess I'll skip to one question that I think has been well known for the U.S. in this region in particular. I think Donald Trump has shown that he is exceptionally talented at a few things, and even his critics can't deny this. And one of them, I think, is breaking things. He breaks conventional wisdom better than almost anyone, right? So he's broken conventional wisdom that the trade war, the tariffs would lead to a global recession right away, at least in the first term. that the movement of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem would lead to global unrest across the Middle East. Similar with assassinating Soleimani in Iran. But then, what about this? This is different. So there's this one question that David Petraeus famously said. He said, "Tell me how this ends." And I'd love to hear, maybe we can just go down the line, how you think this is likely to end.
A war? I mean, look, I have a lot of respect for Petraeus, but I think he sees the region as he was in charge, what, 2 decades ago, a decade and a half ago?
That's when he asked. He asked basically on the eve of the invasion of Iraq.
Yeah. And, you know, the answer to that question is very different 20 years ago than it is today. I don't hide my views that the JCPOA was an absolute disaster. Not because peace is better than war, it obviously is, but because of the terms of the JCPOA.
And maybe we could explain what the JCPOA
Sure.
is.
So in shorthand, for those unfamiliar, the nuclear deal that Obama signed with Rouhani and co. under Zarif, the then foreign minister of Iran. Why was that negotiated outcome, as opposed to war, not really the way to go when it comes to dealing with the mullahs of Tehran? Because it strengthened them, it assisted them financially, and it also assisted them to grow the network of terror around the Middle East, and not just the Middle East, throughout the West. My team and I have extensively written about this, talked about this, conducted research about this. And it's not a simple Republican versus Democrat question, not for me anyway. I'm not American, I don't particularly care. But I can tell you that the extension of the tentacles of the IRGC, for those who don't know, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the army within an army I refer to, they are, by their constitution, by the written constitution, designed and put together to export the revolution of 1979. In simple terms, for those not familiar with what the revolution of 1979 in Iran means, to export the Shia way of life to the world. And that may or may not necessarily be a bad thing in each individual's particular view, but when it comes to the concept of imposing one's ideologies on the rest, I think it's problematic. I think we can all agree on that basic level. Accepting that, the JCPOA was a serious, in my view, leg up to the mullahs of Tehran. It gave them access, depending who you ask, 160 billion. Some say half a trillion. Others say 10 billion. Whatever that figure is. It gave the mullahs of Tehran a leg up that they didn't have. It caused, or rather cultivated, the ability of the IRGC and the Iranian regime to grow to the level that they have right now. So the 12-day war was an attempt to knock out as many batteries as they possibly could before this major one. And I don't think that's been hidden by either the Israelis or the Americans. The Americans said it was an nuclear issue. It wasn't. They were trying to knock out as many launches as possible in order to be able to have this much larger scale war and not be hit as much. But to finish on this, where does this end? It would have ended a lot better without the JCPOA. It will be a lengthy, in my view, a lengthy and unfortunately a prolonged battle unless, and this is a big if, but unless or if some elements within the Islamic regime in Iran become turncoats and do a deal with America. And open bracket in that regard, I can assure you the diaspora and majority of the people in Iran won't buy it, close bracket.
Thank you. Yeah, I think one point that someone I heard make is that the IRGC, the key thing to take away from that name, Islamic Republic Revolutionary Guard Corps, is there's no mention of Iran.
Yeah, precisely. And, it's often touted. So the IRGC was recently, in November last year, designated as a sponsor of terror, not even a terror organization, but that's a legal question for the lawyers in the room. But they were designated a sponsor of terror under Australian legislation In fact, new legislation was passed to allow that to happen because the Albanese government did not want to refer to them as a terror organization for various political or other reasons. By stroke of a pen, Donald Trump did this 8 years ago. The Canadians were second in the world to follow. The European Union was fourth in line. They did it after Australia about a month ago. And one of the leading cries of the advocates in the world in the designation of the IRGC as a terror group, apart from the evidence-backed arguments, is the fact that they are not there to protect Iran or Iranians. They are called, as you say, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
Mike.
So on the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement, there was bipartisan criticism. The leading opponents at the time were the Senate Majority Leader, a Democrat, and the Senate Chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, a Democrat. But when it was signed in the Obama administration, it was after Iraq. There was no appetite for the military option, and diplomacy with a regime like that, absent the threat of force, is you basically have no leverage. So how does this end? I mean, I'm sorry to say it doesn't. Very unlikely. If regime change happened, it ends. Otherwise, it just doesn't. I think the best we can hope for, and I would argue the most likely scenario in the coming weeks, is what you might call a ceasefire. A de facto, not a de jure, but a de facto ceasefire. Everyone is incentivized to do that. Donald Trump is hemorrhaging domestic political support. The Republicans, in my view, won't recover before the midterm elections in November. They'll lose the House. They may even lose the Senate. But he can't take much more than a couple weeks politically, I think. Iran is being defiant, but if you're an Iranian leader, you can't use your cell phone because you might get a JDAM or a missile dropped on your head. And obviously the Gulf states and everyone else around the world wants this to end. So if you've ever studied negotiation theory, that's a good starting position to get to, not a formal ceasefire or treaty, but a de facto ceasefire. The challenge is that the Iranian leadership needs to demonstrate that America paid a price. And so they are taking a maximalist position and they're demanding reparations. And if President Trump does the so-called taco, Trump always chickens out and just pulls out, the Iranians will start charging fees for passing through the Straits of Hormuz. It will look like the U.S. lost the Strait of Hormuz, so it's just not an option. On the other hand, if President Trump is surging forces, it's not enough to invade Iran. The airborne Marine Corps forces, probably Air Force Special Forces, could take Kharg Island, could take places, but it's 90% of Iran's crude oil goes through Kharg Island. So that's a real stranglehold on them. So there may be something to the escalate to de-escalate strategy, but it's very risky because you put people on the ground anywhere and you risk casualties. The other scenario is that those forces actually go to try to get the enriched uranium. That to me is madness because it's under rubble. You're talking a week or two of trying to find it while you're fighting off the entire Iranian army with about 5,000 Marines and about 4,000 Army Airborne. And they're very good, but I don't know if they're that good. So at some point, I think we get to a de facto ceasefire where both sides claim victory. And unfortunately, I suspect we'll be at it again at some point. And I would say there's also a high likelihood that the risk premium for crude from the Gulf will go up. And oil prices will stay, they won't stay over $100 a barrel in my scenario, but they're not going back to 72. On the other hand, as we've discussed, you'll have a grumpy and unhappy, but reluctantly much more closely knit Gulf Cooperation Council, Israel, US, and eventually NATO, Australia, Japan, Korea coalition with Iran further isolated. So it's not, I think that's the best scenario, but I also think it's probably where we end up in a couple of weeks. It's not a great scenario, by the way, it's just the best scenario.
Did you want to add to that and also maybe add why you think beyond just fuel prices, this matters for Australia?
Sure. So two things look, I don't know what will happen at the end of the war. So I wish specific things happen. And the main thing is the elimination of the whole regime, Islamic Republic regime. But as mentioned before, bombs cannot guarantee that. And it would need Iranian people to eventually rise up again. And they will, because this regime is a terrorist regime. And the number of Iranian people who have been victims to this regime is enormous. It's over 10 million of us outside Iran, and the majority of us fled the brutality, violence of this regime. And the people inside Iran are fed up as well. We need to remember only 2 months ago, tens of thousands of them have been killed. So it may not, an uprising may not happen, right away. They are still recovering from the terror and horror that they witnessed. Every single person that I know have lost family members or friends in my network. It is important for all the leaders of the world to come into the understanding that this regime must be gone. Because when we look at the long-term impacts of having the Islamic Republic in power in Iran, even a weak one, will be more wars and more terror around the world. And then again, another war. So we had the 12-day war just last year, and then we have this right now. And then I'm sure, like, if this regime stays in power, there will be another one. The reason for that is that the arms of this regime is everywhere. It's not only in Iran. It's not only terrorizing Iranian people. It's funding terror all around the world. IRGC has its clutch on the government, on all resources inside Iran, businesses. It's basically impossible to do anything specific or of importance inside Iran without having these IRGC people coming and knocking at your door, demanding cooperation, or at least not being against them. So, and we have had the terror in Australia as well. We had 2 anti-Semitic attacks on Jewish place of worship, and also a restaurant. So we have had the experience of these attacks in Australia and in many other countries as well. Diaspora themselves, Iranian Australians here and Iranians in other countries, have been the victim of these international terror network. There had been many assassinations of Iranian activists in US, attempts to terrorize them, attempt to assassinate them in US. There had been assassinations happened over the years in Europe, in many countries. We have had explosions of embassies. We have had many cases of terror attacks by this regime and or criminals that have been employed by this regime. It's a network of terror and terrorists and criminals, and they are linked to a huge financial network as well, using not only monies and banks and these things, but also cryptocurrencies and everything else that the technology. They are using the technology that we use to spread peace, but they use it to spread terror. So basically, it is important for all leaders to come to this realization that Iranian people fighting this regime are actually their only allies in Iran, and they need to support them. They need to take care of them. Iranian people are being brutalized by the system that is supposed to protect them. Right now, we have war happening. There are no sirens in Iran. There are no bomb shelters in Iran. People have to stay inside their houses, watching from their windows what is happening outside. Internet, phones, they are completely cut off. They cannot even get information where is going to be a bomb, when is going to be, any attacks in any cities. They are basically left alone to themselves, and they are just trying to survive right now. And this survival had been, these things had been the same all over these 47 years old from the beginning. And specifically for women, it has been worst, because Faraz mentioned like the mass uprisings that happened over the year, but when the Islamic regime came into power in Iran, the first thing they did in the first week or days of them getting the power was to basically strip women of every single rights they have to their families, to their children, to inheritance, to their lives in public life, what they wear, who they love, what they eat, when they eat. You know, if it is Ramadan and you eat in the streets, you can get lashes. So this is not a normal life, and people are looking to have that normal life. They want that normal life, and they have been fighting for it. They have been killed for it. And they are the allies that international leaders need to listen to, protect them, and give the power back to them so they gain their agency back. And, you know, we will have a peaceful Iran, peaceful Middle East, and a peaceful world, hopefully.
Thank you so much. So we only have a few minutes left, so I'd love to take some questions. If you could just raise your hand and then state your name and your affiliation and your question, not your commentary, that would be preferred. So if you want to go, I saw the first hand in the back, second to the last row.
Hi, my name is William. I'm a student here. And I just wanted to ask a little bit about, actually the context is I've got a few friends from the Iranian diaspora, and their politics are quite diverse. Some have pictures of the Shah in their house, and some were imprisoned by the moral police for being communists after the revolution. But them and their family, they all don't like the regime. But what I kind of want to ask is about, in terms of the evidence behind the support for the regime lowering after the strikes, because what all of them have told me and their family is every time there are signs that there will be a popular uprising in Iran, something like a strike by Israel and America on their soil, or say the Shah taking, I guess, a lot of the public side of that revolution, lowers the domestic support in Iran for internal uprising against the regime. Because the majority of, or at least what I'm told, the majority of people who are against the regime in Iran now are young students, progressive typically, who were born and raised under the regime and have never seen or heard of the Shah, and they really have nothing to do with, say, in the past when Iran had a good relationship with the US and so forth. So I kind of want to ask, what, in terms of beyond anecdotes from both sides I've heard, what terms of evidence that we have shown other people there is that the regime has lost public support after being struck by a foreign power?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that the regime, in my view, was founded upon hatred for America, hatred for Israel, and basically the hijab for women, right? And so this is an attack on all of them in many ways. How relevant is that to young Iranians and Iranians born, the majority of Iranians born after 79?
I'll answer in short, and I'll leave Rana to respond in more wholesome fashion. But can I say this? There is, if your question, if I understood it correctly, was each time there's an attack, there is what, more support behind the regime? Or your question was whether or not the support behind the regime lessens with every attack? The second? Apart from Indo, none. But if you're talking about evidence on the ground, Rana talked about the Gaman survey. You can look at it, Gamaan, I think it's called. And Gaman survey is probably the closest thing we have to a real poll within Iran. Right prior to the Woman Life Revolution, the uprising in September 3.5 years ago, there was a Gaman survey done. In about April the year after, there was another one done. I think there was a third one in between, but there was also a fourth one in September last year, after the 12-day war. After the 12-day war and prior to the mass killings of the 7th or the 8th and 9th of January this year, the support of the regime, so people who said openly that we support the Islamic Republic in its current form, was dwindling in the single digits. The one prior to that was closer to the 10 to 12% that Rana was talking about. Now, whether or not there is a correlation between the support dropping because somebody bombed Iran and the support somehow becoming, I don't know, more diluted, the support of the regime, I don't know. But I think the position is relatively clear. When the people of Iran, This is the citizens living in Iran are galvanized, are given a leg up because the repressive forces are attacked. There is a clear indication that they are more willing to take risk, come out, protest. There's no doubt about that. We've had, I laid out the 6 major sessions, although there were many more, but from 1999 until January this year, every time there was an uprising, and there were no bombs dropped until the 12-day war, but every time there was an uprising, the next uprising became a lot more forceful. The support for the regime became a lot more diluted, but that does not take away from the fact that we've still got 10 or so % of the $90 million population still supporting the mullahs of Tehran. That's 10 million, 900 million, depending what percentage you accept. So whilst there is no direct evidence, empirical evidence, if that's what you're asking me, there is every indication by the process of deductive reasoning that every time there's an uprising or every time there's a fight, the people of Iran, the ones who want change, come out in more numbers, in larger numbers, and a lot more forceful. And there is, I think, in my view, no doubt about that.
Thank you, Faraz. I totally agree. I may just add one note here. We should not confuse people getting scared from the bombs or being against the bombs being fought for support for regime. Of course, someone whose house is being demolished, because of the effects of a bombing or a strike, well, they may just come out and say, oh, what is it? I don't want bombs come and fall on our cities. But that does not mean that they are supporting the regime. The regime has been losing its support from day one, every single day. And there is no way that the way they are managing would be sustainable because they do not manage the country. They are abusing resources of this country, including its people, in order to spread terror on Iranian people and around the world. It's a terrorist organization. This is a realization that needs to happen in every one of us. And you need to accept that this is not a normal state that is just brutal or just, authoritarian. No, it is way, way worse than that. It's a terrorist organization, and there's no way they can keep the power as they are going because Iranian people don't want them. And bombs or no bombs, doesn't matter. This is what Iranian people want, and they will achieve it. And they have showed their determination, even their desperation. Specifically with the younger generation, they are connected. They have been connected to the world. They've been connected to internet. They've seen how young people in Australia, in other countries, how they live. They just live a normal life. This is what they want, and they are not gonna continue. There's no way that it will happen.
Maybe time for just 2 quick questions right in order, and then rapid fire responses, unless we don't have any questions left. All right, I see. Let's just do these 2 right here. And I think one thing I'll sum up their last point, looking at public opinion, I think the high watermark for the Islamic Republic was 1979, and it has only been going down since then. Look at every public opinion poll, not just in Iran, but even globally. So please, 2 questions right in a row.
My question is basically, my name is Rufus, I'm a student here as well. My question is basically, at the start of the war, it seemed that the other Gulf states weren't really in favor of it. Now they very much are gung-ho on the war going on. I want to know what kind of changed that, what influence they have over the war, what influence they have over the Gulf, the Strait, and even the power they have in the region.
Can I say something? And I might let Michael.
One more.
2 questions? Okay.
The second question, I think they called behind. Yep, go ahead.
My question is, in terms of regime change, important issue is whether the members of the regime feel they have anywhere else safe to go outside of Iran.
Great question.
Can anyone think, is there anywhere that would open their arms to the regime members?
Rapid fire response.
Yes.
The second question, Moscow, St. Petersburg. The first question, before I pass the baton to Michael, can I read this to you? I won't say by who or from where, but I'm going to let you guess. My secretary sent this to me this morning when I was in court. A simple ceasefire is not enough. We need a conclusive outcome that addresses Iran's full range of threats: nuclear capabilities, missiles, drones, terror proxies, and blockades of international sea lanes. We want Iran as a normal neighbor. It can be reclusive and even unwelcoming, but it can't attack its neighbors, blockade international waters, or export extremism. When I first read that, sitting in court in my wig and robes, my immediate reaction was, oh, it must be one of the members of the Knesset. Has anybody read that tweet? It wasn't. The UAE. And, you know, the Arabs, you all know this, but the Persians and Arabs are ethnically different. But the Arabs have been friends with the Persians for many centuries, except when it came to this. It's not the first Islamic government of Iran or the Greater Persia as it was. It's not the first. And in fact, the Safavids who imported Shiism into the then Persian Empire reigned for many centuries. The Arabs still lived well with them. They traded with them. They intermarried. But not when Khamenei came in 1979. So to answer that question, I mean, I'm going to let Michael answer it more comprehensively, but I wanted to read that to you because I was surprised to see such an overt position being taken by, I might get a complaint about this, by a weaker state against the Iranian regime. And they, the GCC countries, and they're not the only ones, MBS said something much more thorny last night. Yeah. So that's the short answer to your question.
So on the Gulf Cooperation Council and the GCC states, it appears they were surprised and unhappy. But then when Iran started attacking their infrastructure, their facilities, their airports, it was a moment when these smaller states realized that their assumptions were all wrong, that Iran could not be bribed and contained and deterred, that it was close to an existential threat to them in real time. And so not all of them have been as vocal, but they've had to choose sides, and they've chosen pretty unequivocally. They're going to be with the U.S. in this one. And U.S. aircraft are operating out of almost all these states, intelligence sharing. Bear in mind also that most of these states, their missile defenses, their air forces are overwhelmingly U.S. supplied and trained. And so, you know, I do think we're going to end up with a de facto ceasefire, and then we're going to be in a containment game, and we're going to be at it again. But in a strategic sense, Iran is going to be, in that scenario, more isolated. There's going to be more cooperation among the GCC states, and I think NATO, despite the difficulties they have with Donald Trump. And Iran's going to be in a much, much weaker position geopolitically. And the other dimension of that is our center's doing a lot of work on this, but the so-called CRINCs, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, this alignment. Russia is reportedly providing targeting data to the Iranians for their drones. China is getting their ships through. But this has laid bare how transactional those relationships are. And you said jokingly, maybe Moscow. I'm not so sure. I'm not sure that Putin would take them. And I seriously doubt that Beijing would. So it has weakened Iran. It has shown some of the shallowness of the CRINCs. If it goes badly, if we get up in the United States gets in a prolonged war, or if Donald Trump just pulls out and Iran starts to try to assert hegemony over the Gulf, that would be different. The geopolitical implications and Russia and China's position would be different because Chinese ships are getting through. But it doesn't appear like Donald Trump is going to quote unquote taco because the costs are so high. We shall see. You know, perhaps that's part of the mullahs' desperation and why they took this move to attack the entire region, because they have no place to go.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And that's, again, another reason why they are brutalizing people right now, why they are executing people right now, why they are threatening them through state media, broadcasting threats and telling people, if you ever think of coming out in protest, you will be treated as a spy. And that means execution again.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that fantastic commentary and analysis. If you please join me in a round of applause for this. Thank you very much. And please,
I said thank you.
oh, no, and please, yeah, Rana is an advocate, and she also has been a chief champion of the Iranian soccer players who recently were in Australia. If you want to share a bit about the fundraising.
Yes, so two of the girls could manage to stay despite the threats to themselves and their families. It's a huge sacrifice from the side of their families and also themselves as well. So we set up a fundraising for them. It's on GoFundMe. And it has been going very well. So if you ever feel like donating to a cause, that money will go 100% to the girls. I talked to one of them. Well, one of them called me, sent a message yesterday. And it's for them to start a new life here in Australia freely. They are now doing trainings with one of the teams in Brisbane. I can't remember what was the name. Yeah. So if you ever feel like donating, GoFundMe website, search for Iran, not Iran, sorry, search for, you will be probably, but the Explorer will be closed. If you search for Footballist Australia, something like that, it will come up. And if any of you need the link, I can show you as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.